The sun had barely crested over the rooftops of Charleston, South Carolina, casting a golden warmth on the quiet streets of the historic district. Inside a modest but elegant townhouse, 14-year-old Naomi Sinclair sat at the breakfast table, the morning light catching the edge of the envelope in her hands. It wasn't just any envelope. It was everything she had worked for. She opened it slowly, as if it might vanish with too much excitement. Inside was a neatly printed check, $5,000. Her first academic scholarship, earned through top performance in mathematics at Ravenswood Prep, a prestigious private school known for its rigorous standards and even more rigorous social hierarchies. Across from her sat her father, Dr. Malcolm Sinclair, quietly sipping his coffee, the front page of the Wall Street Journal folded in half. An article about his firm's latest acquisition, a regional bank network, was buried in the lower column. He hadn't mentioned it to Naomi. He didn't need to. Their life wasn't about what he acquired. It was about what she earned. "I can do this myself," Naomi said, her voice clear but not loud. "I want to deposit it alone. That's part of growing up, right?" Dr. Sinclair raised an eyebrow. "Even when the bank is technically yours?" She rolled her eyes. "It's not mine. It's just a bank. And they don't know me. That's the point." He studied her for a moment, then nodded with a slow, proud smile. "All right, Miss Independent. But keep your ID, your check, and your award letter all in one folder. Be polite. Be firm. And call me the moment you leave." Naomi stood up straighter. "Yes, sir." It wasn't the first time she had ventured out alone, but this was different. She wasn't heading to the bookstore or meeting friends for frozen yogurt. This was business. Her business. Her future. And the idea of stepping into that cold, grown-up world, even if just to make a deposit, sent a quiet thrill through her. The Citadel Trust Bank branch on Broad Street looked like a page out of history. Marble columns, brass fixtures, and floor-to-ceiling windows that whispered exclusivity. Naomi's uniform, navy blazer, knee-length skirt, and polished loafers mirrored those of the other prep school kids around town. But inside, she knew, people noticed more than just uniforms. They noticed faces. They noticed skin. Still, she wasn't afraid. Her dad had raised her better than that. She wasn't just proud. She was prepared. Naomi stepped through the grand double doors into the bank lobby just before noon. It was quiet but busy, the sort of atmosphere where people lowered their voices and avoided eye contact. She walked confidently toward the customer service desk, her folder tucked neatly under one arm. A woman at the front, mid-50s, blonde bob, fitted blazer that matched the bank's burgundy decor, looked up and frowned almost imperceptibly. "Ms. Linda Carrington," her nameplate read. Naomi smiled politely. "Good morning. I'm here to deposit a scholarship check. I have all my documentation." Linda didn't return the smile. "Scholarship," she echoed. "How old are you?" 14, Naomi said. "I'm in the accelerated program at Ravenswood Prep." Linda's eyes narrowed slightly. "May I see the check?" Naomi opened her folder and presented it, along with her school ID and award letter. Linda glanced at the papers briefly, then paused. Her eyes flicked between the check and Naomi's face. "Have a seat. I'll be right back." Naomi nodded and took a seat in one of the high-backed chairs near the window, but her sense of accomplishment began to dim. Linda hadn't even looked at her letter properly. Just the check. Just her. She didn't know what was wrong, but she could feel it. Something in the air that had gone still. A few minutes passed before Linda returned, but this time she wasn't alone. A tall security guard followed her, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "Miss," Linda said, not addressing her by name, "we've flagged your transaction for review. There have been issues with fraudulent checks from young individuals lately. We'll need to verify the source before we proceed." Naomi sat up straighter. "It's a scholarship. My school can verify it. It's all in the letter." Linda's voice grew colder. "That's not enough. And until this is cleared up, we'll be holding on to your documents." The security guard stepped closer. "We'll have to ask you to step away from the counter and wait in that corner," he said, pointing to an empty space near the lobby exit. "Bank policy." Naomi's voice caught for a moment. "I don't understand. I'm just trying to deposit my check." Linda crossed her arms. "You don't need to understand. You just need to cooperate." The security guard didn't touch her, but his presence made it clear that non-compliance wasn't an option. Naomi stood slowly, her folder still in Linda's hands, and walked to the designated corner. Her shoes tapped softly against the marble floor. It felt like the sound of being erased. People watched, not loudly, not obviously, but she felt it. A few whispered. A few looked away. No one stepped forward. And so, Naomi stood alone, shoulders back, chin lifted. But her hands trembled just slightly at her sides. She had come for her first moment of independence. Instead, she was being taught a different kind of lesson, a crueler one that had nothing to do with banking, and everything to do with who the world thought she was. Naomi had been standing in the corner of the Citadel Trust Bank lobby for 47 minutes. She hadn't moved. Not because she was told not to, though that was part of it, but because she understood something in her bones. If she so much as shifted her weight or checked a clock too obviously, she'd give them one more reason to see her as a threat, or worse, a problem. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent weeks preparing for her scholarship essay titled "The Currency of Character." And now, here she was, treated as if her character had no value at all. From her vantage point near the exit, she could see the bank's full choreography. Smiling tellers, casually dressed businessmen with coffee cups, elderly customers getting gentle assistance with paperwork. And then there was her, an island, a display, a silent warning of how far politeness can be stretched before it becomes something more sinister. Her legs ached. The weight of public scrutiny pressed against her skin like heat. She hadn't been offered a chair. Not a word had been spoken to her since she was relocated. Linda Carrington reappeared at the teller station, offering warm handshakes to a silver-haired man in a golf shirt. "Mr. Delaney," she greeted him cheerfully, "let me personally assist you today. You deserve the very best." Naomi blinked. She had heard that voice. Not even 2 hours earlier, it had been sharp, suspicious, and clipped. "We'll need to verify the source." "You don't need to understand." "Cooperate." Those words had been saved for her. But the friendliness now, the service now, that was for someone who looked like he belonged. Naomi's uniform, identical in fabric and cut to her white classmates, wasn't enough. Her diction, her grades, her scholarship letter, none of it had granted her entry into the unspoken circle of comfort the bank extended to its preferred clientele. She had entered wearing confidence. She now wore invisibility. At least, almost. Because not everyone was pretending she wasn't there. From behind the counter, Maya Wu, A junior teller with kind eyes and an uneasy posture kept glancing toward Naomi. Subtle at first, just quick checks between customers. But soon, longer stares. Concern replacing hesitation. During a lull in transactions, Maya picked up a stack of deposit slips and began wiping down her area, her eyes flicking to the security guard stationed a few feet from Naomi. He wasn't watching the cameras. He was watching Naomi. Maya's lips pressed into a thin line. Naomi caught the look and held it, unsure whether to hope or shrink from it. People had looked before, curious, nervous, indifferent, but no one had tried to help. Not yet. Meanwhile, the atmosphere around Naomi grew colder. A woman in a camel-colored coat approached Linda, gesturing toward Naomi in a whisper Naomi could still hear. Is she okay? She's been standing there for a while. Linda's answer came with a professional smile and a confident tilt of her head. Just a precaution. Unfortunately, we've had incidents. You understand? The woman's mouth formed a small "oh," and she turned away. She understood. That was the problem. Naomi didn't look away. She had promised herself she wouldn't. She was still clutching the tiny leather notebook her father had given her years ago, the one with her initials in gold foil on the cover. She usually used it for sketching or story ideas. Now, it became her evidence log. Time, words, actions, expressions, everything was being recorded. At 1:28 p.m., Maya did something extraordinary in its simplicity. She reached into her pocket, glanced around, and pulled out her own personal cell phone. She wiped down the surface near the pens, turned toward Naomi without facing her, and murmured under her breath, "Do you need to call someone?" Naomi's eyes widened. "I can't," she whispered back. "They took all my things." Without breaking her motions, Maya placed her phone behind the customer brochure holder on a nearby table. "You've got 5 minutes before the manager notices. Use speaker. Keep it low." Naomi moved slowly, methodically, as if examining one of the pamphlets. Her hand slid behind the brochures and gripped the phone. Her thumb hovered over the keypad. Then she remembered. Her father had said, "If anything goes wrong, call the office." "Extension 3. She dialed. The line rang once, twice, and then, "This is Geneva at Sinclair Holdings." Naomi lowered her voice. "It's Naomi. I'm at the Citadel Trust Bank. Broad Street location. Something's wrong. They won't let me deposit my scholarship check. They took my ID. I've been standing in the corner for almost 2 hours. I can't leave." Silence. Then, "Stay exactly where you are. We're coming." Naomi pressed end, returned the phone, and slipped back into position. Her heart pounded, but not with fear. Not now. With hope. Because someone was coming. Someone who didn't need permission to walk through those marble doors. And this bank was about to learn the full cost of treating a young black girl like she didn't belong. At exactly 2:06 p.m., the hum of quiet conversation in the Citadel Trust Bank was disrupted by the sharp click of polished shoes against the lobby's UST. A man, impeccably dressed, straight-backed, unhurried, stepping through the glass doors with a presence that made the room notice before anyone realized why. Marble floor. No announcement, no fanfare. For the staff, especially manager Linda Carrington, it was like the air shifted without warning. A subtle but unmistakable change. The kind that made you straighten your collar, check your tone, and wonder if you'd missed a critical email. Linda glanced up from her desk with the reflexive smile she reserved for high-net-worth clients. But as her eyes landed on the figure moving steadily toward the center of the branch, that smile faltered. The man wore a deep navy suit, crisp white shirt, and a timepiece that quietly whispered old money and earned success. But it wasn't the suit or the watch that unnerved Linda. It was the familiarity. She didn't know his name yet, but something in her gut told her she should have. The man's name was Julian Cross, founder and CEO of Sinclair Holdings, a national investment and real estate firm headquartered in downtown Chicago. A man whose signature had moved city skylines, whose voice commanded boardrooms, and whose daughter had just spent 2 hours standing in a corner of a bank he was quietly acquiring. Only 3 people in the room recognized him immediately. Maya Wu, who stopped mid-transaction and almost gasped. Geneva, his assistant, who had just entered behind him. And Naomi, still standing in the corner, notebook now pressed tightly to her chest. She didn't smile when she saw him. She exhaled. Julian's gaze swept the room with clinical precision. Not hostility, not even anger. Yet, just assessment. When his eyes found Naomi, everything else in the room went still. He crossed the space in long strides and knelt beside her, taking in the exhaustion behind her eyes, the slight tremble in her arms, the scuff on her shoe she hadn't noticed from standing too long. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. Naomi nodded, not trusting her voice. Julian turned to Maya, still frozen behind her station. "Thank you," he said softly. "I understand what you did." Before Maya could respond, Linda Carrington approached, smile snapping back into place like a brittle mask. "Hello, sir. Can I help you with something today?" Julian rose slowly. His full height, 6 feet 2 inches, with the build of a man who carried stress like armor, cast a long shadow. He didn't need to raise his voice. "You already did," he replied. "You helped yourself to my daughter's documents, her identification, her check. You humiliated her. For 2 hours." Linda blinked. I didn't realize she was—" "Of course you didn't," he said, "because it never occurred to you that someone like her could be someone like me's daughter." Whispers began rising across the lobby. Geneva stepped forward, speaking calmly but firmly. "This branch is under review for acquisition by Sinclair Holdings," she announced, her voice crisp. "Mr. Cross is the majority shareholder. He is now your employer." Linda staggered. "No, that can't be—" "You didn't read the internal memos," Geneva replied coolly, "because you assumed they didn't apply to you." Julian walked toward the center of the bank, turning slowly to face the staff, customers, and security personnel. The bank had fallen into stunned silence. All ears were his. "My daughter came in here with a scholarship check," he said, projecting just loud enough to fill the space. "She followed every rule, had every document, showed every ounce of patience you denied her." He gestured to Naomi, who stood still, but stronger now. "She was made to wait in a corner like a criminal, not because of her behavior, but because of your bias." He turned to Linda again. "You called it procedure, but we both know what it was." "I didn't— I mean, there have been forgeries lately," she stammered. "And how many of those forgeries came from white students in private school uniforms?" he asked, each word a quiet blade. Linda looked down. "You don't need to answer," he said, "because Naomi did. She wrote it all down." He nodded toward her notebook, which she now held in front of her like a shield, but also like a sword. "I've taught my daughter to document everything, because the world is watching now, even when you think it isn't." From behind the front desk, Maya spoke. She was calm the entire time, She didn't argue. She kept saying, I just want to deposit my check. But they wouldn't even let her use a phone. Julian looked at the security guard. Is that true? The man swallowed hard. I was just following. Orders, Julian finished. Yes, I'm sure you were. He turned to Geneva. Get legal on the phone. I want a full compliance audit. Human resources, ethics, customer service, all of it. Start with this location. Pull every recorded conversation from today. Yes, sir. And find this woman's file, he added, gesturing to Linda. I want to know how many complaints were swept under the rug. Linda had gone pale. Julian stepped back to Naomi. You did everything right, he said. You stayed calm. You paid attention. And you trusted me to come. Naomi nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. You always said, being ready doesn't mean expecting the worst. It just means being prepared to turn it into something better. Julian smiled then, just a little. I learned that from your mother. As the murmurs began to spread, as camera phones began to rise, and Twitter fingers itched to share what they'd just seen, Julian turned to the gathered crowd and delivered one final line. No one here will forget what happened today, he said, but they'll remember who stood up and who stood by. The room erupted, not with applause, but with the kind of silence that speaks volumes. Justice had arrived, not in rage, but in clarity and consequence. The conference room at Citadel Trust Bank had never felt smaller. What was once used for quiet strategy meetings and cold quarterly reviews now throbbed with tension, thick with the weight of truth being dragged into the light. The long oak table had been cleared, its usual centerpiece of fresh-cut lilies replaced by a single screen playing back muted surveillance footage from earlier that day. Frame by frame, revealing the discriminatory treatment Naomi Cross had endured. Julian sat at the head of the table, not with fury, but with the stillness of a man who understood exactly how power works when wielded correctly. To his left sat Naomi, her notebook now resting closed beside her. To his right, Geneva and two legal advisors, both quietly compiling reports and statements. Across from him, visibly shrinking under fluorescent lights, sat Linda Carrington. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, knuckles pale, mouth dry. Naomi had not said a word since entering the room. Julian hadn't asked her to, because the evidence spoke for itself. The footage didn't just show Linda's words or her condescending tone. It captured the gestures, the avoidance, the way white customers were ushered into back offices with bottled water and warm smiles, while Naomi had been confined like a threat. It showed Melody's brave moment of humanity, the subtle shoulder turns from other staff trying not to be seen watching. And it showed Naomi standing, waiting, not with defiance, but with the kind of dignity most adults wouldn't have managed. Julian broke the silence. Tell me, Ms. Carrington, if Naomi's last name hadn't been Cross, would you have even looked twice at that check? Linda opened her mouth, then closed it. Words failed her, though not for lack of effort. It was the truth that sealed her throat. She followed every policy, Julian continued, every requirement. And yet you assumed she was a risk because she didn't look like your idea of wealth, your idea of trust, your idea of worth. I understand now, Linda tried to interject. No, he cut in softly. You don't. And that's the problem. You don't understand that Naomi shouldn't need to be my daughter to deserve dignity. She shouldn't have to be connected to power to receive the most basic courtesy. Naomi finally looked up. Her voice, when it came, was measured, but piercing. I was told I didn't belong here, not because of anything I said, not because of anything I did, but because of what I looked like, and who you assumed I wasn't. Linda's eyes watered. I didn't mean. But you did, Naomi said. You meant it in every decision, every dismissive glance, every second you made me stand in a corner while others were invited to sit. The room went still again. From a side door, Tiana Graves, the bank's regional executive, entered. She'd flown in hours earlier from the company's headquarters, briefed midair about what was unfolding. Her usual composed demeanor was visibly rattled. She walked straight to Julian and extended a hand, her voice low. Mr. Cross, I want to personally apologize. What happened here is inexcusable. Julian accepted the gesture with restraint. It's bigger than me, or my daughter, he said. It's about what kind of institution you want this bank to be. Because right now, it's one where perception replaces policy, and bias replaces integrity. Tiana turned toward Linda, her tone sharpening. Effective immediately, Ms. Carrington. You are suspended pending a full ethics investigation. The board will be briefed within the hour. And if any part of what we've reviewed today proves to be systemic, you won't be the only one we hold accountable. Linda slumped further. Naomi's eyes didn't hold vengeance, only resolve. There's something else, she said, reaching for her notebook. With calm precision, she flipped to a page marked not in blue, but in bold red ink. At approximately 1:48 p.m., I witnessed Ms. Carrington meeting with a man named Evan Reeves in her office. She handed him a folder labeled Citadel Transition, confidential. I documented their entire conversation through a gap in the door. Julian's jaw tensed. Evan Reeves was CEO of a rival investment firm and one of Julian's most aggressive corporate adversaries. Their rivalry was both personal and strategic, until now, never openly hostile. Naomi slid the notebook across the table. They discussed diverting high-value clients, leaking portfolio strategies, and undermining this acquisition. Tiana's face went pale. This is corporate espionage, Julian said calmly, and discrimination, both happening under your roof, on the same day. No one moved. Geneva tapped her laptop and projected Naomi's handwritten notes onto the screen. Names, times, quotes. Her attention to detail was surgical. Naomi didn't blink as the screen displayed the phrase she had underlined 3 times. They won't suspect a thing. She's just a girl. Julian's voice was low, but final. You made the mistake of thinking she was just a girl. But what you didn't know is that she's more than my daughter. She's a mind sharper than yours, a witness stronger than your defenses, and a name you'll never forget. Linda buried her face in her hands. Naomi stood slowly, her voice the last one to speak. Don't treat people with respect because of who they're related to. Do it because it's right, because no one should need to carry power to deserve fairness. And with that, she left the room, her father rising beside her. The boardroom didn't erupt. It exhaled. Because justice, when done right, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just walks out of a room, taller than when it came in. Weeks had passed since the incident at Citadel Trust Bank, but its echoes reached far beyond the quiet suburb of Cambridge Hills. What began as a humiliating encounter meant to shrink one girl's place in the world had detonated into a reckoning, a public reminder of how dignity can be withheld in a single glance, and how truth, when recorded and spoken, can recalibrate an entire system. Naomi Cross never sought to be anyone's symbol. She didn't crave headlines or applause. She just wanted to walk into a bank and be treated with the same courtesy that others received without question. But the notebook she carried, filled with meticulous details and damning observations, had done something more than speak for her. It had exposed a thread of rot hiding beneath polished marble floors. Citadel's internal investigation, prompted by Naomi's report and the surveillance footage, uncovered not only Linda Carrington's misconduct, but a broader pattern of discrimination and client favoritism stretching back years. A full audit revealed disparities in loan approvals, targeted marketing, and even account closures. Data that painted a grim portrait of bias masquerading as policy. Julian Cross had not wasted a moment. Within days, he restructured the bank's senior leadership. Tiana Graves was promoted to Executive Vice President of Ethics and Compliance with a new mandate: transform the culture, not just the PR. Linda was terminated and arrested alongside Evan Reeves, whose betrayal reached into areas of corporate theft that drew attention from federal regulators. What had started as a slight against a girl was now a financial scandal of national interest. But behind the press releases and policy overhauls, Naomi returned to something more personal: her ordinary life. She didn't stop doing her homework on the kitchen island while her father finished late calls across the room. She still wrote in her notebook, though now its pages reflected more than injustice. They held ideas, dreams, for what fairness could look like when it wasn't reactive, but deliberate. One Saturday morning, Naomi stood in front of her 8th grade classmates at a school assembly. The topic was leadership, but she spoke not about power or strategy. She spoke about small moments, the kind where someone decides to see you or not. Her voice was steady, her presence magnetic. "I don't want to be known for what happened to me," she said. "I want to be known for what I did about it." The room hushed. Because injustice doesn't need permission to show up. But change, that takes courage. And sometimes, it starts with writing down what no one else will say out loud. Her classmates applauded, not because they'd been told to, but because they recognized something in her words, something they could hold on to too. Meanwhile, at Citadel Trust, transformation was no longer just an idea. It was tangible. A new mentorship program, named the Naomi Initiative, had been launched to connect underrepresented youth with financial literacy resources and internship opportunities. Melody Tran, once a teller afraid of speaking out, had been promoted to training and community liaison. She now trained incoming staff not just in banking software, but in empathy. One of her new hires was a high school senior named Luis, who had watched Naomi's story unfold on his phone and decided he wanted to be part of the change. He brought fresh perspective and a notebook of his own. On a crisp morning in early spring, Naomi and her father walked into the bank together. Not as customers, not as complainants, but as honored guests. The lobby was quieter than usual, not because of discomfort, but because people were watching with respect. A newly installed plaque by the main entrance read, "Fairness is not earned, it is owed," in honor of Naomi Cross, who reminded us all. Naomi didn't stop to admire it. She simply smiled at Melody, who nodded back, and stepped into the conference room, where a group of young interns waited for their orientation session. Today, she wasn't telling her story. She was helping others begin writing theirs. Julian stood just outside the glass wall, watching his daughter speak to the room. He said nothing, didn't need to. The pride in his eyes was quiet but complete. He knew the bank had been balanced on two columns: policy and perception. But it was Naomi who had reminded them all what the true third pillar must be: people. And when a system forgets the people it claims to serve, all the equity in the world won't save it from collapse. That day, as they drove home together, Naomi looked out the window, her notebook in her lap, a new page open and ready. She had written 3 words across the top in bold, clean handwriting: "Next begins here." And for once, she wasn't writing alone. Naomi Cross didn't walk into Citadel Trust Bank to change anything. She wasn't looking to prove a point or spark headlines. All she wanted was to deposit a scholarship check, something any 14-year-old should be able to do without fear, without judgment, and certainly without humiliation. But what she received instead was a chilling reminder of how prejudice doesn't always shout. It whispers, it smirks, it hides behind polished desks and phrases like protocol and standard procedure. Yet what followed wasn't just about exposure. It wasn't just about the viral footage or the shocked expressions of board members. It was about transformation. From one young girl's humiliation came the unveiling of a broken culture, and more importantly, a blueprint for change. Naomi didn't fight back with rage. She didn't scream. She did something far more dangerous to those in power. She paid attention. She took notes. She documented. And when the moment came to speak, she spoke clearly, calmly, and with the weight of truth behind every word. It wasn't just her dignity that had been tested. It was her patience, her awareness, and her willingness to believe that justice could still exist, even when it felt painfully delayed. Her father, Julian Cross, could have solved everything with a single phone call. As the owner of the very bank that mistreated his daughter, he held every card. But like Naomi, he understood something deeper: that fixing one injustice doesn't stop the system that allowed it. So he let the truth unfold on its own. Because sometimes the most profound power isn't in control. It's in letting the truth speak for itself. What makes this story matter isn't that Naomi was the daughter of someone powerful. It's that no one in that bank knew who she was, and they treated her accordingly. That's the problem. Because the reality is, everyone deserves to be treated with respect, not just those with influence. The lesson here isn't don't mistreat someone because they might be connected. It's don't mistreat anyone. Period. Naomi's story became a mirror. For some, it reflected shame. For others, it sparked courage. And for many, it inspired action. Today, policies have changed. Programs have launched. A bank once known for cold efficiency now carries a plaque with her name, a reminder that fairness is not a luxury, but a right. But the real change? It's happening elsewhere. In classrooms where students like Naomi are learning that their voices matter. In workplaces where employees like Melody Tran are finding the courage to speak up. In homes where parents are now talking to their kids about dignity, empathy, and the quiet power of paying attention. So what does this story ask of us? It asks us to believe that small acts, like saying, "This isn't right," or handing someone a phone, or simply listening, can ripple outward in ways we may never fully see. It asks us to choose character over comfort. And above all, it reminds us that justice doesn't always come in loud declarations. It often arrives through patience, persistence, and a single voice refusing to be silenced. Naomi Cross is just one girl. But her story, it belongs to all of us. because it proves that change doesn't begin when we have power. It begins the moment we decide to use whatever voice we have to stand for what's right. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you reflect, don't let it end here. Subscribe to this channel, share this video, and join us in telling more stories that challenge injustice and celebrate resilience. Your support gives us the power to keep creating content that matters. Stories that don't just entertain, but enlighten. Because together, one voice at a time, we're building something bigger, and we're just getting started.